Hello, welcome to this narrated slideshow on rhythm in poetry, and this is a review of concepts that are discussed in Chapter 6. There's going to be a lot of vocabulary in here, and don't get too caught up in, worrying about the vocabulary. The main takeaway here is that poetry uses rhythm in purposeful ways, and poets will often exploit rhythm to achieve a particular goal. So, I always have trouble with the first slide. Let's see. There we are. Okay, so we're going to start off by listening to William Van Fields read Rothke's poem, My Papa's Waltz, which is in the opening of the chapter. And Mr. Van Fields is just an average, ordinary person who is reading this poem as part of the Favorite Poem Project that has been spearheaded by poet Robert Pinsky. It's a great website. As Van Fields reads, pay attention to the rhythm. What might Rothke be trying to do with the rhythm or the beat in this poem? So I'm going to take you to the website. And I'm going to introduce you to the narrator, and then I'm going to show the text of the poem as he reads.
I discovered the poem in a poetry class, and I was asked to analyze the poem. And when I read it, it evoked memories of my father. And I just, not just of my father either, of my mother also, and of myself. It really did move me. It seriously did. And so I wrote this analyzation of the poem and delivered it to the class. I felt it odd, though, that my analyzation of the poem was totally different from everyone else in the class. Out of students, all the other students, and the teacher too, no one agreed with me that it was a joyful poem, that it was a positive poem. Everyone thought that it was a poem that was about spousal abuse, alcoholism, and child abuse. And of course I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a father coming home from work, tired, eating a meal, had a brandy or a whiskey, and he and his son are playing in the kitchen, and they're rattling the pots and the pans, and of course Mom gets a little mad to say, calm it down. But no one agreed with that. My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Rythm. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. There's a few key words in the poem. Whiskey is mentioned. Beat is a word also, talking about beating time on the young boy's head. And the look on the wife's face, the consternation that she feels, because her pots and pans are rattling around the kitchen. But I didn't take that at all to mean that. My mother also would say, come on you guys, cut it out, I'm trying to clean up here or whatever, but it wasn't, it was playful. It was totally playful. My father was not a drinking man in the sense that he was an alcoholic. He did enjoy a whiskey before going to bed, or a brandy, he did, and was a very playful man, a very loving man. My wife and I have been married 35 years. We've had 8 children, which 5 are boys. I've wrestled with all of them, wrestled with the girls too. And they wrestle with their kids. And I'm sure there's no abuse in there, I think it's important for us to do that with our children. It's a bonding thing for fathers to do that with their sons, with all of their kids.
Okay, that is my Papa's Waltz.
The favorite.
And we will return to the slideshow. There we go. So did you notice anything about how the poem's rhythm contributes to the theme or the idea of the poem? And think about the title. And if you think about the title, he's talking about his Papa waltzing. And I think in the poem, he's trying to work with the idea of a waltzing rhythm. Da 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 da. But maybe it's a little bit of a jagged waltz because, you know, he's wrestling with, waltzing with a child. So it might be da 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 da. And if you listen to the poem again, you might start to hear that. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. So again, this is just one example of how a poet might want to work with rhyme to enhance the idea of the poem, or to have maybe the rhythm imitate the topic of the poem in some way, and it's kind of interesting. So when we talk about rhythm in poetry, we use a vocabulary around the word meter. And scansion marks, which the book talks about, are those little marks that help us to analyze and develop rhythm. So the accent or emphasis mark is the little mark that you see there. And the not accented mark is that little upside down C, or maybe you'd call it a little U. And if you were a poet working with a poem, you might mark up your poem in this way to see where the accented syllables are and where the unaccented syllables are. So you would start to get a sense of the rhythm, and then you might start to see a pattern emerge that you might want to further develop, or you might be trying to work with a certain pattern, so you have to kind of tweak things. So poets would use these tools quite a bit. Now, within meter, the foot is the basic unit of measurement. So I know it sounds kind of mathy, but no worries about the vocab. We can write poetry without knowing this vocab, and in fact, I never really understood the vocab until I taught this course. I started teaching this course about 15 years ago. No one had ever really explained it to me, and you know, I don't know, iambic, pentameter, tetrameter, trochaic, I didn't know what it was. So we can still write poetry without, you know, doing the poetry speak, but it can be useful to know how poets might approach rhythm. So we're going to go through it. So the iambic foot is basically the basic unit of speech in English. This is how we our most common speech cadence, and it is an unaccented syllable followed by an accented one. Ta-dum, kerplop. Most old school English poetry, like a sonnet, is written with an iambic foot. A trochaic foot is the opposite. It's accented, unaccented. Pumpkin, famous, party. The anapestic foot, which sounds a little bit like a disease, is 3 syllables, and the third syllable is accented. On a train, in a war. A dactylic foot is the opposite of that, with the first syllable accented, the last 2 not accented. Destiny, harmony. Some more feet is the amphibrachyic foot, which sounds a little bit like something, it sounds like a dinosaur. And there's the potato, Ebola. So it's 3 syllables, and the middle one is accented. Then there is the spondaic foot, and this is when two syllables are both accented. And I think it's a pretty theatrical foot, and maybe is used more often in like dramatic monologues or within plays like Shakespeare's works. Die, die. Sounds like something from Hamlet or Macbeth. Go, go. A pyrrhic foot is two unaccented syllables, not very common in English. And a monosyllabic foot is one syllable accented that gets put into another line of poetry to break up the pattern. So in this case, the monosyllabic foot is what? The other feet are more like the back, whoops, I forget the name of the one with the three syllables. What? For the dawn of the morning is breaking. So that what is the monosyllabic foot. Now we're going to take a look, we're going to try to figure out what line meter means. And Shakespeare's sonnet, number 73, is in the book. I'm sure it's easy to find online as well. I'm going to read this, and we're going to think about what is the name of this, what's the line meter for this line? That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang. So let's start by looking at how many syllables are in each line. So we'll just take the first line. They both have the same number of syllables. That time of year thou mayst in me behold. So that's 10 syllables. What type of feet or foot is in here? Could be mixed up with feet, but it's a pretty classic iambic foot. That time of year thou mayst in me behold. The second one is accented. So this would be an iambic pentameter line. There are 5 iambic feet. Each one has 2 syllables, and there's 10 syllables in a line. So 5 iambic feet is iambic pentameter. Metrical lines, often, but not always, I guess I should say 1 foot, will be 2 syllables. So counting the number of syllables can help you determine the type of line. Now there are those other types of feet, the destiny and the in a train, but really most of the time in English we're working with the iambic, the trochaic, and the more the 2-syllable ones. So how many feet would be in a dimeter line? That would be 2 feet. A trimeter line, there would be 3 feet. A tetrameter, there would be 4 feet. And a pentameter, as we just talked about, is 5 feet. A hexameter is 6 feet. And then there's a septimeter and an octameter, and I suppose you could go on and on. So let's take a look at the Going to Bed book. This is a really neat little kids book that I like it as a book, but I also like how it shows meter. Now Sandra Boynton is using a particular metrical pattern, and as many children's book authors do, and she may not be consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to use the such and such pattern when she writes the book, but later when she's revising and tweaking, she's probably looking for patterns and then trying to work with the patterns that are emerging. So as you listen, try to think about what the dominant metrical pattern is here.
The Going to Bed book. The sun has set not long ago. Now everybody goes below to take a bath in one big tub with soap all over. Scrub, scrub, scrub. They hang their towels on the wall and find pajamas big and small, with some on top and some beneath. They brush and brush and brush their teeth. And when the moon is on the rise, they all go up to exercise. And down once more, but not so fast. They're on their way to bed at last. The day is done. they say good night, and somebody turns off the light. The moon is high, the sea is deep, they rock and rock and rock to sleep.
So that's the Going to Bed book. And here's the line. Now let's see if we can figure out what kind of foot we're working with here, or what kind of feet. The moon is high, the sea is deep, they rock and rock and rock to sleep. So if you guessed iambic foot, iambic feet, that was correct. And notice how the rhythm really works with the idea of the poem. It's a bedtime book, and it's something that's soothing, and they're trying to maybe help a child go to sleep. They rock and rock and rock to sleep. Super nice there. So it's a 2-syllable foot, an iambic foot. So if you count the syllables, the moon is high, the sea is deep. You've got 8 syllables, right? So, does anyone know what type of metrical line? That would be a tetrameter, 4-syllable line. So it would be iambic tetrameter. Now, whoops. In the poem, did you notice any place where Boynton disrupted her tetrameter lines? And there's a little bit of background action here as my cat invades my space. Let's look at this line. To take a bath in one big tub with soap all over. Scrub, scrub, scrub. So a lot of times one reason that poets like to work with a pattern is because they can then break it. And breaking or disrupting the pattern is a really fun tool to use when you're working with rhythm. Now on the website I have link to Johnny Cash singing Walk the Line. You can listen to that on your own. But what kind of feet dominate his lines? Can you identify a pattern? And how does he break or disrupt the pattern? So this week we're going to analyze our rhyming poem with the scansion marks and try to see what kind of pattern starts to emerge. And see if you can develop the pattern further. For example, if you know that you've got maybe an 8-syllable line and a 9-syllable line and 3 other 8-syllable lines, there's a chance you can probably get that 9-syllable line down to 8 syllables and maybe work with an iambic tetrameter. And once you develop the pattern further, you can maybe exploit it with a break or disruption. If you don't have a pattern, you can't break the pattern, so you need to establish the pattern to have a break or disruption. And again, don't worry too much about the terminology of the iambic pentameter and dimeter and trimeter. The main concept is that rhythm matters in poetry, and it's something that poets pay a lot of attention to, as do musicians and songwriters. This is the end of the slideshow. Thank you.